to the United Nations authorities, the representatives of the different countries that make it up, and all the citizens of the world who are watching us. Good afternoon. For those who don't know, I am not a politician, I am an economist, a libertarian liberal economist who never had the ambition to get into politics and who was honored with the position of President of the Argentine Republic in the face of the colossal failure of more than a century of collectivist policies that destroyed our country. This is my first speech at the United Nations General Assembly, and I want to take the opportunity to humbly warn the nations of the world about the path they've been on for decades and the danger that this organization might fail to fulfill its original mission. I'm not here to tell the world what to do. I'm here to tell the world, on one hand, what will happen if the United Nations continues to promote the collectivist policies under the mandate of the 2030 Agenda, and on the other hand, what values the new Argentina defends. I do want to start by giving credit where credit is due. The United Nations was born from the horrors of the most brutal war in global history, with the main objective of ensuring that it never happened again. To this end, the organization etched its core principles in stone in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. There, a basic agreement was recorded around the maxim that all human beings are born free and equal in dignity and rights. Under the guidance of this organization and the adoption of these ideas, humanity has experienced the longest period of global peace in history over the last 70 years, which also coincided with the period of greatest economic growth in history. An international forum was created where nations could resolve their conflicts through cooperation instead of instantly resorting to arms, and something unthinkable was achieved, permanently seating the world's 5 greatest powers at the same table, each with the same veto power despite having completely opposing interests. All of this didn't make the scourge of war disappear, but for now, it has prevented any conflict from escalating to global proportions. The result was that we went from having 2 world wars in less than 40 years, which together claimed more than 120 million lives, to 70 consecutive years of relative peace and global stability under an order that allowed the entire world to integrate commercially, compete, and prosper. Because as Bastiat said, where trade enters, bullets do not. Because trade guarantees peace, freedom guarantees trade, and equality before the law guarantees freedom. This fulfilled what was recorded by the prophet Isaiah and can be read in the park across the street. God will judge between the nations and arbitrate for many peoples. They will beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation will not take up sword against nation. They will never again know war. This is what has mainly occurred under the tutelage of the United Nations in its first decades. And from this perspective, we are talking about a remarkable success in the history of nations that cannot be ignored. However, at some point, and as usually happens with most bureaucratic structures that we humans create, this organization stopped watching over the principles outlined in its founding declaration and began to change. An organization that was essentially conceived as a shield to protect the realm of men transformed into a leviathan with many tentacles that aims to decide not only what each nation state should do, but also how all citizens of the world should live. Mo and I and Kiradis, this is how we went from an organization that pursued peace to an organization that imposes an ideological agenda on its members on countless issues concerning human life in society. The United Nations model that had been successful, whose origin we can trace back to President Wilson's ideas of a society of peace without victory, and that was founded on the cooperation of nation states, has been abandoned. It has been replaced by a model of supranational government, of international bureaucrats who seek to impose a determined way of life on the citizens of the world. What is being discussed this week here in New York at the Summit of the Future is nothing other than the deepening of this tragic direction that this institution has adopted. The deepening of a model which, in the words of the United Nations Secretary General himself, requires defining a new social contract on a global scale, doubling down on the commitments of the 2030 Agenda. I want to be clear about the position of the Argentine agenda. The 2030 Agenda, although well-intentioned in its goals, is nothing but a supranational government program of a socialist nature that seeks to solve the problems of modernity with solutions that undermine the sovereignty of nation-states and violate the right to life, liberty, and property of individuals. It is an agenda that seeks to solve poverty, inequality, and discrimination with legislation that only deepens those issues. Because world history shows that the only way to guarantee prosperity is by limiting the power of the monarch, ensuring equality before the law, and defending the right to life, liberty, and property of individuals. It has been precisely the adoption of that agenda, which obeys privileged interests and the abandonment of the principles outlined in the United Nations Universal Declaration of Human Rights, that distorted the role of this institution and set it on the wrong path. Thus, we have seen how an organization that was born to defend human rights has become one of the main promoters of the systematic violation of freedom, for example, with the global lockdowns during the year 2020, which should be considered a crime against humanity. In this very house that claims to defend human rights, they've allowed bloody dictatorships like those of Cuba and Venezuela into the Human Rights Council without the slightest reproach. In this same house that claims to defend women's rights, they allow countries that punish their women for showing skin into the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination against Women. In this very house, systematically, votes have been cast against the State of Israel, which is the only country in the Middle East that defends liberal democracy, while at the same time demonstrating a total incapacity to respond to the scourge of terrorism. On the economic front, collectivist policies have been promoted that hinder economic growth, violate property rights, and impede the natural economic process, preventing the poorest countries in the world from freely enjoying their own resources to get ahead. Regulations and provisions precisely pushed by the countries that developed by doing the very things that they condemn today. A toxic relationship has also been promoted between global governance policies and international credit organizations, demanding the most underprivileged countries commit resources they do not have to programs they do not need, turning them into perpetual debtors to promote the global elite's agenda. Neither has the tutelage of the World Economic Forum been helpful, where ridiculous policies with Malthusian blinders are promoted, like the zero emissions policies, which harm poor countries the most, or policies related to sexual and reproductive rights, when the birth rate in Western countries is plummeting, announcing a bleak future for all. The organization has also not satisfactorily fulfilled its mission to defend the territorial sovereignty of its member states, as we Argentinians know firsthand in our relation to the Falkland Islands. And we have even reached a situation where the Security Council, which is the most important body of this House, has become distorted because the veto of its permanent members began to be used in defense of the particular interests of a few. So here we are today, with an organization impotent in providing solutions to real global conflicts, such as the aberration and abhorrent Russian invasion of Ukraine, which has already cost the lives of over 300,000 people, leaving a trail of more than 1 million wounded. An organization that, instead of addressing these conflicts, spends time and effort imposing on poor countries how they should produce, who they should associate with, what they should eat, and what to believe in, as the present Pact for the Future intends to dictate. Poseiya paya sa maya basian ali. This entire long list of errors and contradictions has not been without consequences, leading to a loss of credibility of the United Nations among the citizens of the free world and to the disfiguration of its functions. Therefore, I want to issue a warning. We are witnessing the end of an era. The collectivism and moral posturing of the UOC agenda have collided with reality and no longer have credible solutions to offer for the world's real problems. In fact, they never did. If the 2030 agenda failed, as its very promoters admit, The response should be to ask ourselves if it was a poorly conceived program from the start, accept reality, and change course. You can't persist in error by doubling down on a failed agenda. This always happens with ideas that come from the left, and they design a model according to what humans should do, according to them. And when individuals freely act differently, their solution is to restrict, repress, and curtail their freedom. We in Argentina have already seen with our own eyes what lies at the end of this path of envy and sad passions: poverty, debasement, anarchy, and a fatal absence of freedom. We still have time to steer away from that path. I want to be clear about something to avoid any misunderstandings. Argentina, which is undergoing a profound process of change at present, has decided to embrace the ideas of freedom. These ideas say that all citizens are born free and equal before the law, that we have inalienable rights granted by the Creator, including the right to life, liberty, and property. These principles that guide the process of change we are undertaking in Argentina are also the principles that will drive our international conduct from now on. We believe in the defense of life for all. We believe in the defense of property for all. We believe in freedom of expression for all. We believe in freedom of worship for all. We believe in freedom of trade for all for all. And we believe in limited governments, all of them. And as nowadays, what happens in one country quickly impacts others, we believe that all peoples should live free from tyranny and oppression, whether it takes the form of political oppression, economic enslavement, or religious fanaticism. That fundamental idea must not remain just words. It must be supported through actions, diplomatically, economically, and materially, through the combined strength of all countries that defend freedom. This doctrine of the new Argentina is nothing more or less than the true essence of the United Nations, that is, the cooperation of United Nations in defense of freedom. If the United Nations decides to return to the principles that gave it life and adapt once again to its intended role, count on Argentina's unwavering support in the fight for freedom. Also know that Argentina will not support any policy that involves the restriction of individual freedoms, commerce, or the violation of individuals' natural rights. It doesn't matter who promotes it or how much consensus that institution might have. Sanama inamo balia. For this reason, we want to officially express our dissent regarding the future pact signed on Sunday. We invite all nations of the free world to join us, not only in dissenting from this pact, but in creating a new agenda for this noble institution, the agenda of freedom. Starting from this day, know that the Argentine Republic will abandon its historic position of neutrality that has characterized us and will be at the forefront of the fight in defense of freedom. Because St. Pesti, as Thomas Paine said, those who wish to reap the blessings of freedom must, like men, undergo the fatigue of supporting it. May God bless the Argentinians and all the citizens of the world, and may the forces of heaven be with us. Long live freedom, damn it. Thank you very much.